August 3, 1901 17 a.m. Danvers State Asylum, Massachusetts. They say no one screamed louder than the girl in Ward 6, but when the orderlies rushed in, they found no girl, only claw marks down the walls. Bloodied fingernails embedded in the stone, and a name. Rebecca scratched over and over into the ceiling beams 15 feet high. No ladder, no chair, just impossibility staring back through candlelight. That night, 11 patients were found dead in their locked cells, each one with a shattered jaw and missing tongue. The official report, mass hysteria, but the staff who survived, they were never the same. One hung himself in the laundry chute, another carved her own eyes out, and the rest, committed, silenced. Danvers was shuttered, buried, forgotten, but what if Danvers wasn't the first, and what if it wasn't madness? But something older, between 1800 and 1950, over 900 asylums were built across the United States, hidden in forests, perched on hillsides, designed to cleanse the disturbed, but not all who entered were insane. And not all who left were human. These weren't just hospitals, they were institutions of control, places where inconvenient wives, rebellious daughters, orphan boys, and failed priests disappeared behind iron gates. Diagnosed with melancholia, hysteria, or moral insanity, they were fed through systems that turned people into shadows, and some into something worse. From the hushed hills of Pennsylvania to the drowned wards beneath Louisiana swamps, these places were far more than haunted buildings. They were psychic landmines, soaked in trauma so deep it altered the very air. What was being treated was never the mind, it was secrets, buried ones, ancient ones, tied to bloodlines, rituals, and the unspeakable. This isn't about ghosts. This is about a war fought in locked rooms and padded cells, a war against forbidden knowledge. And it's a war we lost. In 1842, a former theologian named Dr. Silas Grunwald designed the blueprints for over 24 asylums across the Northeast. But Grunwald was no ordinary architect. Before medicine, he preached sermons on internal purgation and the divine need for institutional suffering. He claimed that certain souls were portals, not metaphorically, but literally, gateways to the spiritual contagions of forgotten ages. His solution: brick, steam, and silence. Every room he designed had 7 corners, each door 3 locks, each hallway measured to the cubit. The buildings were perfect circles when viewed from above, a geometry of containment, he called it. But no 2 blueprints were ever the same. Rumors swirled that he copied his dimensions from ancient European crypts, or worse, that he took inspiration from a black codex recovered in the catacombs of Avignon. When questioned, he would only say, "These aren't hospitals, they are temples of amnesia." Of the 24 asylums Grunwald built, 19 suffered unexplained mass deaths within 10 years. His final design, Grunwald Asylum in Vermont, was demolished in 1894, but not before 73 patients vanished during a week-long snowstorm. Not a single body was found, only a ring of scorched stone in the courtyard. In the fall of 1869, Marlborough Asylum in New York received a shipment of children. That's the word use, shipment, 80. 3 orphans ages 5 to 12, all taken from church-run homes after exhibiting violent sleep disturbances. And the gift of tongues. Dr. Felix Murnau, head physician, wasn't a doctor of medicine, but of comparative religion. He saw the children not as patients, but as vessels, carriers of some hidden inheritance. Under candlelight and opium mist, he began what he called the ethereal exposure trials. They were kept awake for 11 days. Then submerged in warm brine, then confined in soundless chambers with strange glyphs painted on the walls. Glyphs traced from Babylonian scrolls claimed were pre-Adamic. On the 12th day, every child screamed at once. Witnesses reported the sound cracked windows across 2 floors. The children spoke in unison, a language never identified, then silence. The next morning they were all gone. The nuns who ran the home swore they never existed. But records show 83 blankets folded in a locked storage room, and a stained glass window that appeared overnight, depicting faceless children in chains, floating above an open sea. No artist ever came forward. Elmwood Asylum, built atop a former Native American burial ground in Indiana, was opened in 1857 and shuttered just 6 years later, but not because of scandal or disease. It was closed because the ground beneath it would not stop moving. Patients reported hearing chanting from the basement. Nurses claimed to see earth bulge up through the floorboards. And the central stairwell, installed to connect the second floor to the boiler room, descended for 24 steps too many. When they tried to measure it, they never reached the bottom. The basement door was sealed with bricks after 3 orderlies went missing. They were last seen dragging a gurney carrying an unresponsive patient named Abel Reed, who had scrawled a warning across his chest in ink, "Do not let IT follow me back." Weeks later, water began leaking up through the tiles. Then bones, then a black sludge that ate through boots. A local priest declared the land inhospitable to God. When Elmwood was finally torn down, the diggers found a hole beneath the asylum's foundation. A perfect spiral 8 feet wide, descending far deeper than any shovel could reach. They never filled it. High atop a hill in Vicksburg, Mississippi, sat St. Agnes, an all-girls asylum funded quietly by the Catholic Church. From 1874 to 1902, it housed girls deemed morally unstable, often orphaned, abused, or simply rebellious. But what began as a reform school turned into a ritual compound, a prison cloaked in prayer. The girls were forced to sing hymns 12 hours a day, not for discipline, but for suppression. Former janitor Isaiah Bell claimed the hymns weren't Christian at all. He'd caught a glimpse of a book in the chapel marked with a burned handprint, filled with Latin that twisted mid-sentence into symbols. The girls sang in strange meters, no pauses, no breath, and always in groups of 13. One stormy night in 1896, the town below awoke to a sound like an organ made of teeth. The asylum was engulfed in blue light. When firemen arrived, no one was inside. No staff, no children, no bodies. Only a perfect spiral of 104 pairs of shoes, and the air, it smelled like myrrh and iron. To this day, local hikers report hearing faint singing through the trees at midnight. Always 13 voices in unison. No one who follows the sound returns the same. In 1911, at the Weathers Institute for the Broken Mind in rural Oregon, a letter was intercepted. It was addressed to the Vatican. The contents, a detailed description of an experiment referred to as the Lazarus Protocol. The letter claimed they had resurrected a subject. Room 9 was locked for 31 days. Inside, a 12-year-old boy named Marcus who had died from malnourishment, or so they thought. His body was returned to the ward freezer, only for him to be found sitting upright 2 nights later, eyes black, silent, and smiling. The staff panicked. The chaplain was summoned, but Marcus never spoke again. He only watched. His shadow never matched his posture, and over the next week, everyone who entered room 9 either went mad or died by self-mutilation. When government officials arrived to investigate, the asylum had already burned to the ground. Only one survivor was found in the ash, Marcus, still smiling, still silent. The boy was taken, vanished into federal custody. The letter, however, was authenticated and archived in a vault beneath the Archivum Secretum Apostolicum, the Vatican's secret archives. It was filed under non-redeemable soul constructs. Room 9 remains untouched, rebuilt, but sealed in glass. In 1882, deep in the bayous of Louisiana, St. Germain's Sanatorium received a mysterious donation. 12 male patients, shackled and blindfolded, transferred from an unnamed military facility. They had no files, no names, just identical tattoos across their scalps, an Ouroboros devouring its own spine. Staff were told they were nonviolent observers, but the patients never spoke, never moved, unless you turned your back. Nurses complained of whispered voices in their Ears, lights burst randomly, rats fled the building, and one patient during bath time was found hollowed out entirely, his skin still floating in the tub, unbroken like a suit. Then the deaths began, always silent, always with the eyes of the deceased gouged from within. One orderly left a single note before disappearing: "They are not men, they are sentinels." And the door is already open. After a failed exorcism, the church withdrew funding. The building was burned down under federal supervision, but local folklore warns: never whistle past the ruins, never at night, and never twice, because those who do, they say 12 shadows still patrol the swamp, watching, waiting, and their skin isn't their own anymore. Gideon's Cross, a mining town in Colorado, vanished from all census records after 1898. Its asylum, Crane Hollow, was built right into the cliffside, funded by mining families desperate to house workers broken by cave collapses and mercury poisoning. But Crane Hollow didn't treat trauma, it collected it. A journalist, Emily Wren, investigated the town in 1904. Her diary was recovered from a collapsed mineshaft. It described walls that pulsed like living flesh, whispered confessions from stone, and therapists in white robes who spoke only in echoes, as if their voices weren't theirs but borrowed. She wrote, "They feed the building with grief, with guilt, and it feeds back. I saw a man weep until his ribs broke through his chest. I saw a mother forget her children's names, then her own." The townsfolk disappeared within weeks. The mine caved in. Crane Hollow was buried alive, but climbers say that on some nights the stone groans, that you can still hear Emily's last words etched faintly into a boulder above the ruins. It remembers everything. In 1853, an asylum on the outskirts of Providence, Rhode Island, was seized by federal agents. Its chief administrator, Dr. Julian Ashworth, was accused of conducting psychic vivisections. He believed the soul could be dissected, separated from memory, personality, guilt. He called it the doctrine of unmaking. Patients were treated with chemical amnesia, locked in mirrored cells, and read their own confessionals backwards over phonographs. The goal: to erase identity, to reduce the human spirit to pure obedience. It worked. Dozens of patients became husks, motionless, silent. They would mimic movements of staff, blink for blink. Then in 1854, something changed. The patients began whispering each other's secrets, things they could never have known. Then they all turned their beds to face north. Then, one by one, they scratched a single phrase into the floorboards: "He is almost done writing me." Ashworth's body was found hanging in the bell tower, mouth sewn shut, but his journal survived. Inside were pages written in reverse, documenting communications with the architects below. The federal government seized everything, files marked as mythological contamination. The building was repurposed into a school, but sometimes children there dream in reverse and wake up crying someone else's tears. Built in Montana Territory, 1871, Hillcrest Sanatorium was funded by a secretive fraternal order known only as the Three-Limbed Cross. Their stated mission: to refine the afflicted through ordeal. Hillcrest was their crucible. Patients underwent something called the sanity trial, 3 escalating challenges meant to separate the soul from shadow. The first trial involved silence. Patients were placed in an underground cell for 72 hours without light or sound. The second would fire a ritual branding of a spiral onto their left palm. The third was never written down. Records show 91 patients underwent the full trial. None were released. But in the winter of 1875, a survivor, Margaret Lee, escaped and reached a church 12 miles north. She couldn't speak. Her tongue had been carefully removed and replaced with a carved bone key. On her back, tattooed in raw scars, were the words, "3 become none, the 4th opens." The 5th remembers. The asylum burned down 3 weeks later. Official cause: lightning. In its ashes, a 4th-level basement was discovered that had never been in the original plans. Inside were hundreds of spiral carvings, and no doors leading out. At St. Bellamy's home for the deranged and unwanted, Illinois, there was one room none of the nurses would enter, not because of what was in it, but because of what came out of it. Room 217 was known as the mother's room. Legend says it once housed a woman named Agnes Hallow, who, after losing her child in childbirth, refused to speak or eat. She simply sat day and night, whispering lullabies into a hand sewn doll she kept clutched to her chest. But Agnes died in 1883. The doll did not. For years after, new patients assigned to room 217 complained of rocking sounds at night, of a lullaby echoing without source, of pressure on their chests while they slept, like being held by invisible arms. Several patients were found in the fetal position, teeth shattered, clutching imaginary infants. Staff began referring to the unseen force as Mother. And then, mothers across the county began dreaming of room 217, of a crib that moved by itself. In 1891, the room was bricked over, but the rocking continued, through the walls, the floor, even in the attic. The final note from Sister Clarissa read, "She never had a child, but now she is one. And she's still learning to crawl." In the small Appalachian town of Carterville, Kentucky, the asylum wasn't a building, it was the entire town. Between 1879 and 1884, nearly every resident, men, women, and children, began keeping detailed ledgers of their dreams, emotions, and bodily fluids, pages upon pages of daily records, written in matching handwriting, no matter the author. When asked why, they all said the same thing: it's for the blood census. A traveling physician named Dr. Harrow filed reports to the state. When investigators arrived, they found the townspeople in a trance-like state, sitting around an empty chair in the town hall, mumbling equations. Each equation contained variations of the same number, 441. No one could explain its meaning, but when one investigator attempted to burn a ledger, he was seized by the crowd and placed in the chair. He vanished, simply ceased to exist, not died, vanished. Within 24 hours, the town was empty, every home still lit, meals on stoves, doors open, no footprints in or out. The town remains untouched, but hikers report strange stacks of ledgers still being written, left on porches, in barns, by unseen hands, each one ending with 441 remembered, 441 collected. 441 remain. In Crookhaven, Pennsylvania, the local asylum specialized in treating lunacy, a term used for those whose conditions were believed to fluctuate with the moon. Dr. Lenister Crane had a theory that lunar magnetism could awaken genetic memories, ancestral trauma stored in the marrow. In 1892, during a lunar eclipse, Crane conducted a mass therapy session in the asylum's iron ward, a room encased entirely in raw, unsmoothed metal. 37 patients, no lights, no sound, only the pull of the eclipse and a vibrating tuning fork placed in the center of the room. 37 minutes later, every patient was found fused to the walls, not melted, not burned, fused, limbs half-submerged in iron, mouths agape mid-scream. Crane had vanished. The only clue left behind was a single phrase scratched into the iron with fingernails: "They dream in metal. They always have." The room was sealed, the asylum condemned, but over a century later, paranormal teams recorded high-pitched frequencies emanating from the rusting walls, matching the exact tone of Crane's tuning fork. No wildlife lives within a mile radius. The moon never rises the same way. Above Crookhaven, its light bends, like it remembers something it once touched and couldn't forget. In 1907, a 7-year-old named Isaac Weller was admitted to Edison Home for the Feeble-Minded in upstate New York. His parents had died mysteriously, and Isaac had begun drawing compulsively maps. Dozens of them, but the places weren't real, not on any chart. Names like the Hollow Crown, the Stairwell Fields, the orchard where they buried time. Staff thought it was fantasy, until a visiting cartographer fainted upon seeing the drawings, claiming they matched layouts found in a medieval grimoire lost during the Black Plague. Overnight, Isaac's drawings changed. Now they depicted the Edison building, its secret rooms, crawl spaces, even underground tunnels no one knew existed. The maps began including staff names, dates, symbols that resembled astrological alignments. Then predictions. On January 4, 1908, The exact map of the ward's east wing appeared 3 days before it collapsed, killing 8. Isaac had drawn it in red, with an X where the ceiling would fail. He died weeks later, spontaneously combusted in front of a nurse. The map stopped, but one remained incomplete. It's now sealed in the Library of Congress under high security classification, unknown topology, active non-Euclidean site. The last words Isaac ever said, "I didn't draw them, I just copied them." He was showing me, in Alton Grove Sanitarium, Missouri, between 1901 and 1909, patients began reporting an eerie ritual referred to in whispers as the harvest. It always happened between 3:33 and 3:37 a.m. A bell would ring that no one admitted to ringing. The power would flicker, even before electricity, and one patient each week would be taken to Room 0. Room 0 didn't exist on any blueprint, but it appeared in dreams. Dozens of patients sketched the same stone door with 12 rusted locks, and above it, the phrase, "What is remembered must be harvested." Nurses found patients the next day different, ties unfocused, unable to remember names or even how to speak. But what terrified staff was that these patients still functioned, following routines perfectly, mimicking speech, eating, sleeping, without identity. One nurse claimed to see a room under the east wing filled with jars. Hundreds of them, each labeled with a person's name and a date, and filled with a shimmering silver fog. When the building was finally abandoned, explorers broke into the east wing and found a door made of bone. Etched into it, in Latin, "Collecta memoria, vita sine umbra," collected memory. Life without shadow, no one has opened it. The Brackenridge Institute for Troubled Youth, Montana, was a reform school disguised as an asylum. From 1888 to 1893, 52 boys between the ages of 8 and 16 were admitted for what was described as congenital spiritual misalignment. The boys were not allowed to speak, not allowed to write, not allowed to sleep unsupervised. By 1891, locals referred to them as the Ashmouth Boys. They were often seen at night walking in circles on the grounds, mouths stained black from charcoal, which they had been made to eat. Dr. Elgin Strauss believed the boys carried ancestral curses, passed through their breath, his cure, purification through silence and carbon. But one night, a traveling preacher broke in to free the children. What he found was not salvation, but horror. Each boy had his lips sewn shut with sinew, not thread, their tongues burned with sacred symbols from Sumerian tablets, and when the preacher tried to cut one boy free, the others screamed through closed mouths. The preacher lost his mind. His journal ended with one phrase, repeated 108 times: "They were never children." They were warnings. Brackenridge burned down 3 months later, but no bodies were found, just 52 sets of lips pinned to the chapel wall. In Arkham Hollow, Maine, the Arkvale Institute for the Psychologically Unwell was destroyed by fire in 1866. Everyone assumed it was gone forever, until it reappeared, same location, same architecture, but it had not been rebuilt, it had regrown. Locals swore the asylum simply appeared again, fully formed, 33 years later, overgrown with ivy, yet clean inside, furniture unburned, medical records on the desks, even tea in the cups. But there were differences. The floors creaked. Wrong. The air never warmed. Reflections in mirrors didn't match the room. And when investigators stayed overnight, they reported the building had new hallways in the morning. One man, a linguist named Patrick Vey, found a journal from the original staff physician. In it, he described an agreement, a covenant made with something he only called the architect. It builds for the broken, but demands pieces in return. Vey vanished inside the east wing. His final recording, "The House Breathes." And it remembers me. The Arkvale Institute still stands. The town has no power over it, no jurisdiction. It is marked on maps, but not in property records, and it continues to shift, just enough that you forget where you've already walked. Most asylums had churches, but in St. Braulio's Asylum in New Mexico, the church was not built for the patients. It was built by them. In 1899, under the direction of Dr. Bernhard Collos, Patients began compulsively sketching identical floor plans for a chapel that must be built before the moon sheds its last skin. Staff initially ignored it, but then, over 3 months, patients who had never spoken began humming in harmony. They built with stone they carried from the surrounding desert. When it was complete, the chapel had no windows, no cross, no altar, but it had a pulpit facing the wall. No staff dared enter it, but one priest did, a father. Jerome, he entered alone. What he saw was never recorded, but he screamed for 19 minutes without taking a breath, then gouged his eyes out with a rosary. After that, the patients stopped speaking entirely, even the staff. It was as if the ability to form words had been vacuumed out. St. Brolio's closed within the year. The chapel remains untouched. A sign posted outside reads, "To speak here is to undo the tongue. To pray is to be answered." And every Sunday at 3:16 a.m., the chapel door opens for exactly 7 seconds. In the remote hills of Eureka, Nevada, a tiny asylum known as Godwin House held only one patient for 48 years. No name, no age, just a man who arrived in 1892, naked, covered in bruises, and humming a tune that no one could place. Staff nicknamed him the unfinished patient. He never aged, never slept, never defecated, but every morning his skin showed new surgical scars, perfectly sutured incisions along his back, thighs, ribs, skull. When they tried to sedate him, the drugs turned to vapor in the syringe. When they shaved his head, the hair regrew instantly. And when they X-rayed his chest in 1938, the image showed a second spine growing inside him, coiled like a snake. Each week, he'd hum a different tune. Researchers eventually realized the songs predicted deaths, not just locally but globally: fires, shipwrecks, suicides. The last song he hummed was played by a nurse on a piano. The keys shattered. The next morning, he was gone. All that remained was a page scrawled in coal beneath his cot. "I was the first they practiced on. You are the last," and they've perfected the incision. Godwin House collapsed the following week. No cause found, just one long cut through the center, like the earth itself had been opened.